Point number 4, judicial committees. Now with this one, we'll truly be here all day, and it would just be the tip of the iceberg. The sad part is this unscriptural practice is so harmful and of little benefit to the spirituality of the members of the congregation. We touched on it briefly on our episode, Performance-Based Spirituality. They use scriptures like, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am in their midst. That is absurd to try and support the barbaric system. For instance, when we read Matthew 20:18, that should suffice. And of course, for 60 to 70 years, or approximately, the Watchtower, that were perfectly fine with Matthew 18. If you read Russell's works, Matthew 18 worked pretty good. For the entire time of Russell, worked pretty good for the time of Rutherford. 1950s, new light. All that studying was for nothing. They missed the judicial committees. Can you imagine that? Russell, all his study, didn't see judicial committees. Rutherford didn't see them. Oh, new light. By the way, the Bible has this biblical practice of judicial committees. Sounds a little strange, doesn't it? Let me share some of the thoughts from Ray Franz's book, In Search of Christian Freedom. Ray Franz is a former governing body member. And let's take a look at what he had to say. Okay, reading from Ray Franz's book, In Search of Christian Freedom, on page 319, and we're going to touch on also page 322. And speaking of the judicial committees, he said a scriptural practice unscripturally, and note on paragraph 2, he says, in Watchtower policy, however, this apostolic instruction has been applied in ways that converts it into a basis for a complicated, formalistic exercise of legal authority, whereby those supposed to serve as spiritual shepherds are often become little more than spiritual policemen, even detectives, prosecutors, court judges, and the imposers of sanctions. A system that seems in many respects to be patterned after the law enforcement and judicial systems of the world, certainly not patterned on the Bible. With initial courts and appeals courts, where's that in the Bible? And prescribed procedures, modes of sentencing, and probationary arrangements. What about reinstatement? See that in the Bible? Elders even form an ecclesiastical court before whom divorce actions must first be cleared as acceptable if remarriage is contemplated. The organization's policy, in effect, established a confessional arrangement with elders serving as father confessors to whom all serious sins must be confessed, and who can grant absolution if they decide. And as we have seen, they produce an informer system, with each member feeling duty-bound to report any deviation from the organizational norm on the part of any members, even parents and sons and daughters and so forth, unless that person goes himself to the confession of the elder body. At the same time, this results in an attitude and climate in which individuals who fall into wrongdoing often fear to seek help, feeling concerned that admission of the wrong will immediately start the wheels of the judiciary machine to work. Page 322, some other notes he made here. It says, as discussed, efforts at reform or readjustment are, let me start that again. And on page 322, Raymond Franz continues to take note of elders and judicial committees. It says, as discussed, efforts at reform or readjustment to save the person generally do not go beyond the holding of 1 or 2 meetings with him or her. As a sort of universal remedy, elders usually prescribed increased field service and meeting attendance. And if the person does not follow this prescription, this is viewed as evidence of an unrepentant attitude. Where in the Bible does it say that? Rarely is an enduring, long-term program of personal help offered or supplied. If a judge guilty and of not having demonstrated sufficient evidence of repentance, the judgment of the committee, whether for disfellowshipping or as a less drastic action for the persons being publicly reproved, is announced to the congregation without the congregations knowing the actual ground for the decision. Also, not in the Bible. If disfellowship, the individual now is viewed as in a disfellowshipped state. It is no longer a question of what he's actually doing or the life he is living, but what the category or status is. He can only exit from that status by following the prescribed procedure of the organization, not the prescribed procedure of the Bible. The decision as to whether to declare his disfellowship state as ended or not rests entirely with a judicial committee of elders. And notice this example given here. Thus, a young man of 16 may be disfellowshipped for some act of sexual immorality. He may not choose to go through the necessary steps for reinstatement and the ending of his disfellowship status. However, he may no longer engage in sexual immorality, may later marry, father children, show himself to be a faithful husband, a good father, and an honest, responsible person seeking to live by Christian principles. Yet no matter how many years have passed or what kind of person he shows himself to be, he is to be treated the same as if he were a sexually immoral person, a corrupting influence, a person with whom other Christians, even his family members, should not associate. Why? Because he has not taken the legal steps ordained by the organization for having the disfellowship state lifted and being officially declared fit for association. Friends, when preparing this material, this subject more than any others was exhausting. Hearing story after story, how this unscriptural practice is hurting people in probably every congregation of Jehovah's Witness. But we'll move on for today. We'll have many videos in the future to give voice to people crying out of this unscriptural, God-dishonoring, hurtful, and legalistic practice.